Aloha! Nice to see you. My name's Eric. I don't know about you, but I've been on YouTube lately and I've been scrolling and I've been scrolling, and wow, sometimes I'm just so bored I can't find anything. One of the things I do like to find, though, there are various channels. They could be like Answers with Joe, or I don't know, there's this other guy, he wears a Rolex now, he's bald, but he's always promoting like different hair things. I love his channels. He does, I don't even know what they're called, but these people just talk. They just talk at the camera. And I find it so interesting. They're probably better talkers than me. I'm not one for oratory. I remember being obsessed with it when I was in grade school. I remember being in this club called Toastmasters. I remember, wanting to join the How to Win Friends and Influence People book club, essentially. And all these things are sort of like pro-social, discourse oriented clubs, if you will. But I'm not really good at it. Maybe I might be able to get better by talking with you all on YouTube. And for now, honestly, you all probably consist of myself when I'm checking this video, and maybe a few other people. And if that's it, that is awesome. I'm glad that we are getting to have this sort of conversation right now. I've been thinking about what it is that I even like. What do I like? What do you like? What are our interests? And I am nearing midlife. So it's funny to me now that 20 years ago, so 2 decades, I found out about this guy. He's a little loony, but he's a lot of fun. At least he seems like it. Um, and he's loony in that way that geniuses or people who might be geniuses are loony. So a good kind of loony, I think. His name's Aubrey de Grey. And I remember at the time I was eating chicken. It was late at night. I was in college and I was over at one of my best friend's houses, and we were just talking about all kinds of stuff. And we were that nerdy kind of, young guy. And we were talking about sciencey things, and we came across in conversation the topic of Aubrey de Grey and his interesting idea of LEV, or longevity escape velocity. And here's this guy who's proposing this idea whereby you have, at one point in time, human lifespan, let's say 500 years ago, 5,000 years ago, maybe, being 35 years. So really not maturing very much into adulthood, right? And instead, the environment is killing off these human beings because, let's face it, at this point, we are very much a part of the food chain. I mean, you go back and you learn anything about like ancient Greece, and like ancient Greece from before the Bronze Age collapsed. These people were battling lions. That's amazing. Human beings were having battles and fights with lions for territory. So we were very much a part of the food chain. And of course, it was not until very recently that human beings discovered the infusoria under the microscope that can be seen to teem and multiply, that we now know are germs and that cause disease. There's a very good book about that called The Ghost Map, and I recommend it. It follows a main character, Jon Snow, not that one, a real Jon Snow who discovered what causes cholera epidemics. Crazy. He was an epidemiologist. Now, recently, human beings have figured this out, right? In the past 100 years and somewhat in the past 2 centuries there. And it's new enough, and it's a crazy enough idea still, that we have a lot of human beings, don't we, that we recently learned don't like epidemiologists even today, don't trust what they do, don't believe in things like vaccines. Certainly they aren't candidates to be the next Francis Salk, some of these people. And we even have people who apparently don't believe in the germ theory of medicine. Wow. But all of this is fascinating, right? So we had these people, they were living to 35, maybe 5,000 years ago, maybe in certain parts of the world 500 years ago. And now the lifespan is, in America, something like 78. And if you go to a place like Australia, maybe it's 82. And if you go to a place like Japan, maybe it's 84, the lifespan. And if you go to a city-state like Monaco, where everyone is rather wealthy, maybe the average lifespan there is higher. Maybe it's 86 or 90 or 92. I don't really remember off the top of my head, but I know that one, I think that one is the highest up of the microstates. And so Aubrey de Grey comes along more than 2 decades ago, but I think this is when we kind of caught on to the idea. And he says, what if this were to keep going? And if it were to keep going, well, human progress, it has kept going, right? But if you think about it, Marcus Aurelius, the Roman general in what, the 150s AD, was he? He was marching in the same way and down the same road and very much with the same tools of war that Caesar would have been marching with and on in what, the 50s and 40s BC. So you had like 200 years of life pass humanity by, and at least in this one society, the Roman Empire, they didn't really have that much technological or scientific progress to show for it. And some would say, and maybe it's because I only have a bachelor's in history, so I don't really understand all of the minutiae, but some would say, and I would tend to agree with them, that at least in Europe, much of Europe, when the Roman Empire fell, there was sort of a relapse in understanding of the world and technology in many ways. Well, fast forward, and it's the 1400s, and again, you're back in Italy with me now, and you're in Florence, and there starts to be a revival of sorts for the first time in over 1,000 years. You have painters figuring out perspective and proportion, and they're using these things to draft up things that are like blueprints for the first time. And you have architectural forms that are now so advanced in their engineering that they are larger and broader, wider, more impressive, less supported than, say, what the Romans and the Byzantines had been doing, and everyone after them up until that point, right? Well, finally you start to have some technological progress, and it continues and it speeds up, right? So not only do you have a continuation of progress, but you have a speeding up of progress. That is pretty cool, I would say. And it seems to continue all the way to today. Aubrey de Grey, his idea of LEV, or longevity escape velocity, he was saying, what if you continued to have progress, but also in addition to that, the progress that you had sped up? So maybe in the year 1900, the life expectancy was, and I don't know what it was, so let's just pick an arbitrary number and make things easy. Let's say it was 50. And then let's say in 1960, sorry, in 1950, it was 60 years old. And now let's say in 2000, it was 70. And now it's, 25 years later, after 2000, it's whatever, 78 for us here in the USA. Well, what if it continued and it got to the point where you were having and this is all theoretical. I'm not saying this is what happens, or is what is happening. Clearly, I'm not very good at this rhetoric stuff, right? So anyway, he's saying, what if you get to a point where you're adding a year of life expectancy every year? What if you get to a point where you're adding more than a year of life expectancy to the human condition faster than every calendar year? What if you get to a point where you're saying every 12 months, human life expectancy increases 2 years? What happens then? And the answer is nobody knows, because that's never happened. And the oldest person that we have on record, again, I don't remember their name. I do believe I remember that it is a female. And I do believe the age was 122 years old and some odd months and days. There are disputes about that. I think those disputes are kind of silly. To fall back on something the beloved Carl Sagan said, it's good to have skepticism, but you need imagination and skepticism both. You kind of got to balance them out, right? That claim, it seems like there's been something like 115 billion people to ever live. I think I've read that statistic somewhere. Out of 115 billion people to ever live, with more than 10 billion of them living in the last 150 years. So maybe 10 billion people who had a good shot of having like accurate records kept. That's a lot of people. Seems that there would be an outlier, right? There would be the upper end of life. And 122 doesn't seem far out of the realm of possibility. Even if it was only 120 or 115 or 110, doesn't matter. It looks like right now, human beings, if they lived in every way possible that they could, they won the genetic lottery, and they were healthy enough, and they weren't exposed to, too many environmental pollutants that could shorten life, it looks like you can get past 100 currently. And it does look like there are ways to get the general population closer to that upper bound, because we do have countries where we have a much lower life expectancy. We have countries that still have life expectancies in the 60s. We have countries like the USA, where life expectancies, they're kind of fluctuating, trending down right now, which is not what we want to see, but it's in the upper 70s, mid to upper 70s. And we have countries where it's already in the 80s, big countries. Japan is a big country. Australia is a good-sized country, landmass-wise, and I think they've got a diverse population. I've been there and I love it. And they live into their 80s on average. And then, of course, you do have the microstates. Often, these are richer states with people of means. However, the therapies, if the trend of science that we've been experiencing continues, the therapies and medicines of those of means today will hopefully become those of the masses tomorrow. That may mean that in the next 5, 10, 25 years, the average person in, say, G7 nations could maybe move up to be more like Monaco's life expectancies, which are mid to upper 80s or even lower 90s in many cases. Many cases, individually speaking, I should say. That would be fantastic. That would be moving toward that longevity escape velocity. Now, of course, longevity escape velocity does not have an upper bound, so we would have to do far more than that. But that's where things get interesting. You already have today people challenging the taboo that we can't try and extend lifespans in some people's minds in an unnatural way. Right now, you have people doing things that are very interesting. David Sinclair, I don't know enough about science and medical science to accept what he's saying or to totally dismiss what he's saying. There are skeptics like his arch enemy and rival, Charles Brenner, who very much dislike him. Okay. He also, Charles Brenner, seems to very much dislike one Bryan Johnson, who you might have heard of. He's quite the character now. I think it's good that he's being a character, because him being a character is sort of spreading the word that people are beginning to want to work toward extending health span and lifespan and moving toward longevity escape velocity. So anyway, this is now being talked about. And it's good that we've got the dreamers on the one hand. Let's say Bryan Johnson is one of the dreamers. And that we've got the skeptics on the other hand. Charles Brenner is one of the skeptics. And then we can maybe meet in the middle, right? Now, we do want the skeptics to help protect us from false claims. I would love to meet and talk with David Sinclair. At the same time, some of what he's said may not totally meet up with the most rigorous evidence. For instance, resveratrol, 20 years ago maybe, it was thought to be a supplement that could perhaps help extend lifespan, and today, no. Basically, it's a C or D tier supplement for longevity, because there just doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence in support of it, and that's fine. That's the scientific method. We have a hypothesis and we test it, and sometimes we have to give up on the hypothesis, right? Because the null result proves to be the result that we get, right? So in that case, Charles Brenner can protect us. In other cases, even Charles Brenner, he was on Twitter and he was arguing with this, I think he's a great YouTuber. I can't think of his name. I think his name is maybe Brad. He's a doctor. I think he's a Kiwi, so I think he's from New Zealand. And he does like longevity related supplement and medicine related YouTube videos. Anyway, they were arguing, and foolishly so, I think. I've noticed that very intelligent people who happen to be in science can sometimes have egos out of whack. I am also guilty. I'm not intelligent or in science. But I've noticed my own ego can be out of whack, right? So I can't fault anyone. But they were definitely arguing and it was kind of comical if you weren't them. And Charles Brenner was pointing out that there's some medical thing that's been discovered, and the other guy, the YouTuber who's a doctor, was saying like, oh, well, do you bias much because there's like one participant or something in this study? And Dr. Charles Brenner made a great point. If it's a rare disease, by the nature of it being rare, you cannot have many human participants. Right? So it is valid what they have learned, because that's the standard of evidence for this thing. And that's important. When we're talking about LEV, we've got to talk about the standards of evidence. And when we're talking about science, we've got to remember that we should fall back on empiricism. And ultimately, if you are trying to be empirical, you are already doing much better than most people are doing at trying to do anything. If you are trying to be empirical, even if you only have a case study of one, at least you're cataloging what's going on, right? And so what I would like to do next is I'd like to talk about Bryan Johnson. And the reason I would like to talk about Bryan Johnson is because what he is doing, I believe, is empirical. And frankly, I think it's dishonest to say that what he's doing is not scientific. He is helping to formulate hypotheses that can then be tested in a larger population. What he is also helping us to do is to have a case study of one, much like the rare disease cases where we must have a case study of one and base suppositions on that because of the rarity of the condition. It is very rare for a human being to have the drive and the means to longitudinally try and become perfectly healthy. And it's so rare that we don't even know what perfect health is. And that's mind-boggling. Human beings have been around for something like 125,000 years. That's Homo sapiens or Homo sapiens sapien. I don't remember which of those two off the top of my head, but one of those two, which we are or come from, have been around for at least that long, maybe longer. And never in history have we been able to point to one human being and say, that human being, for this period of their life, from this date to that date, was perfectly healthy, and this is what perfect health looked like for that person or any person at that age or any age. And that's mind-boggling. And Bryan Johnson is trying to become perfectly healthy, not just to see what that is and what it looks like, but because he hopes that it can help him live forever. How? I don't think Bryan Johnson thinks that having a veganish diet and doing red light therapy and getting Tixel on his face and on his body and having blood transfusions or exchanging his plasma for some goop that whatever it is supposed to be healthy. I don't think he thinks that's going to make him live forever. I think his goal is that since he started when he was around like 37, 38, 39, hopefully in his mind, I'm assuming, this is me assuming Bryan Johnson's suppositions, that he started early enough where he can be the person who, in perfect health, gets to 110 or 115 or 120. Because when Bryan Johnson is 110 or 115 or 120, why, he's only like in his 40s right now, I think. So let's just say he's 50 in the year 2025. That'll help us do math easier. If he's 50 now, I think he's in his 40s, but let's say he's 50 in 2025. If he's perfectly healthy, and he's perfectly healthy for the next 50 years, does he make it to 100? Well, I would tell you yes. And I would tell you yes because there was a billionaire who recently had their obituary in the paper here in Hawaii. I saw it in the Star Advertiser. And the obituary said that this guy in either his late 80s or his early 90s decided to turn his life around and have a very healthy diet and try and be healthy because he wanted to be the first person, the first guy or something to live to like 120. And he died at the age of 100. I would submit to you that most billionaires who aren't oligarchs who are going to be jump off or fall off some Eastern European balcony will probably make it to around 100 just by the fact of having everything that they have. Now, if you were to add that to being perfectly healthy for at least 60 years up until the point of being 100, because again, Bryan Johnson started this journey when he was around 40. So we're going to add 10 years to the 50 years that he's living. Then at the age of 100, that puts him in the year 2075. He's been perfectly healthy, first human being to be perfectly healthy, for 60 years now. Okay, I think he could get to 110 just by being perfectly healthy. But now it's 2085. He's 110 years old. He's still doing everything that he can do to be perfectly healthy. And it's the year 2085. So short of nuclear war or destruction of humanity under the jackboot of the titanium skeleton machines from, Terminator nightmares or something crazy, an asteroid hit or something. If humanity's progress has continued, are you going to tell me that a person who's a billionaire today, who's probably a trillionaire by then just based on compound interest or whatever, won't be able to afford some newfangled medical science that allows that person to live another 10 years? 15 years or 20 years, if it's a therapy that they can recurrently return to? And if so, again, now you're into the 2100s. If he can pay for that therapy. And now he's older than 120. Hasn't he at this point likely reached longevity escape velocity? It seems like he's got a good shot. So I think that's what Bryan Johnson is thinking of deep in his mind. Now, at the same time, I want to step back and I want to talk about Charles Brenner. And the reason I want to talk about Charles Brenner is because I think it's good that he's a skeptic. Maybe a bit too skeptical, but we need hard skeptics, so I don't want him to change his tune. And that's because what Bryan Johnson is also doing at the same time is, he's making big, bold claims. The cynical person could say that he's doing this, because he's a snake oil salesman, and indeed he actually is literally that. He sells olive oil called snake oil. And he's also trying to build a community. Now, there is something to I think both of those things that we could say maybe isn't awful. First, there is evidence that people who are a part of a community, so if you're like religious and you go to church regularly and you continue to do that throughout your life and into your old age, you're going to be less lonely, your mind's going to be sharper, and you're going to live longer. It's just a fact. Bryan Johnson is a-religious. He left the Mormon church. You got to have some kind of community, and there is also evidence, isn't there, social science evidence, that you are like basically the people you surround yourself with. So if you're going to have a community that you're going to be a part of, and you're the first person striving to be perfectly healthy and striving to live forever, really. I mean, people have been striving since Gilgamesh 5,000 years ago to live forever. However, here's the first time with science and a king's hoard of treasure, that someone can work toward this goal. Wouldn't you want to build a community that would also be striving toward this goal? On the other hand, maybe it's a cult. He does joke, hopefully, that it's a cult. And it's the Don't Die movement. I would like to start the Please Live movement. Anyway, so that's that. That's the maybe cut him some slack notion of him building a movement around what he calls Don't Die. Then there is the products. So to be honest, I take a lot of supplements because for the past 20 years, I have wanted to live forever. And I don't know what I look like. I assume I just look like the average middle-aged man. Certainly, I have too much real estate here and here for my liking. And it doesn't look like it maybe on camera right now, hopefully not, but I feel like it's way too thin in here. Anyway, I've been taking supplements on and off that are supposed to help with longevity and doing supposedly pro-longevity things on and off, again, for the past 2 decades or 20 years. I would like this to be true. It is inconvenient and it is expensive. It would make sense that even for someone who has just over $1 billion, with all he's doing, you got to remember how capital works for a billionaire. They don't just have $1 billion sitting around or $1 billion coming in every year that they can dispose of. He's got like $1 billion of assets. And from that, he's got to grow it with at least inflation, right? So whatever income he's generating, and he's got a team that he's got to pay, that's money that's going out. And then he's spending like $2 million a year on all these various esoteric, very high-end therapies that we can't reach. You got to fund that somehow. And he sold his company already. So he's not like he's getting new revenue coming in. He's got to build something. Why wouldn't you build what you're already focused on? So yeah, from that standpoint, it makes sense that just to make his life easier and to provide some revenue, he would create this product line. Now, on the other hand, what you could also say is, and I have seen this firsthand, I'll tell you why in a minute, but honestly, when you go to his website, and I don't even remember what it is, probably like don'tdie.com or like blueprint.com, because he calls his medical and diet and everything that he does Blueprint. It's kind of all over the place. And like I went on there and I was curious and I was planning to buy. I was like, I could probably spend like $450 a month on this thing. To try it out anyway, I mean, it might simplify my life. It would have not simplified my life. And also, I just noticed some things. Like, I am also vegan-ish. I'm a pescatarian. I stopped eating cheese and dairy a while back, and my body decided that it was going to become lactose intolerant. So now I can't eat it even if I want to. So I'm kind of forced into just eating like plant-based stuff. And then, you know what? I live in Hawaii, and my wife and I, we still eat fish, and I'm guilty, okay? But at the same time, if any group of people on Earth should be able to eat fish, it's the people who don't eat any other, animals, almost no other animal products. We still enjoy honey. Sorry. And we live in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So if anyone should be able to eat fish, I feel like we deserve that right. Sorry. But also it's supposed to be good for you. So anyway, that's us. And frankly, like at first, and still, like duck. I used to love duck. I used to love filet mignon. I used to love, oh God, prime ribs, hot dogs, Impossible hot dogs. I love them. And for some reason, Impossible doesn't seem to want to make them consistently or send them to Hawaii consistently or keep them in stores consistently. And that breaks me because I miss hot dogs so bad. And hot dogs are gross. But plant-based ones that taste just like them aren't gross at all. And I would love to eat them every day. I wouldn't be so healthy, but it would be healthier than eating the animal-based ones. Anyway, so at first, I did miss these things. I overconsumed, and I was, to be honest, unhealthy because of it. And I'm healthier now that I don't consume any of it. But now, when I think about eating it, unlike when I first started doing this, it's not appetizing. It's weird. And I don't want to do it. So I'm looking at his products, and he says he's veganish. But in there's like chicken-derived this, and like animal-derived that. And he talks about wanting to limit microplastics, and I feel like, wants to preserve the earth. But at the same time, it's like, I'm looking at the packaging, and it's all plastic, from what I can tell. I'm like, I get it. There's like a built-in supply chain that you got to deal with. But at the same time, buddy, like, you're sending mixed signals here. It's hard to take you seriously in some cases, right? And when I'm thinking about, I look at the research and I see with my own eyes, like, oh, this is what the formulation should be, or, this is how many grams or milligrams of this thing I should be getting at this interval. And it isn't that. It's something else. It's like, what? Or like he like, I don't know, like I read certain things about like, hey, maybe there's some benefits to something like ashwagandha, but there's also like all these potential side effects. And yet he's got it in there. And it's like, does it really need to be? Especially because aren't you like marketing this thing to the general public, which includes like women too? And do they need the benefit of what you're saying would be extra testosterone, which no, they probably don't? So anyway, I get Charles Brenner's criticisms, and people like him help me stay grounded. And also, we've seen, haven't we, with other billionaires, that really, is there any altruism in the world? And maybe not. So I don't want to do any hero worship. At the same time, I can be grateful that others with more means than me are using themselves as literal guinea pigs, testing out wacky interventions that even if I had the money don't know that I would feel comfortable putting myself through. Tixel is one thing. Now, I can't afford that yet. But having all my plasma removed, or going to some Central American or Caribbean island or the Bahamas to get like a gene therapy for $25,000 an injection. I'm not sure that I would do that either at the moment, but he's doing it. And that's important. Because in this system of capital with which we find ourselves living, what has traditionally happened, like it or not, is that the way that technology has proliferated is that it has started with very rich and eccentric people getting certain things that are very expensive and perform very poorly and are very inconvenient. And that money is a funding source that drives people to go forward and try to make products that are less expensive, less inconvenient, and less terrible. And eventually, you end up with something that only governments could afford, right? Like a computer made of vacuum tubes that fill a warehouse, to something like this that costs $750 and is much more powerful than if the world had been blanketed in warehouses of those vacuum tubes. And if you think about it, we went from those vacuum tube computers in, let's say, 1945 to this in 2025, which, if I'm correct, is only something like 70 years or 80 years. And if Bryan Johnson is only 50 at the moment, and we were to add on 70 years, well, that would put him at 120 years old. And what will anti-aging therapies look like when he and everyone else has access not to the weird Central American gene injections that he's paying $25,000 a pop for, but when those interventions are the equivalent of this. So anyway, I think that's the thing that I am most interested in intellectually. And this seems like a long and rambling YouTube video. We're going on 45 minutes. But wow, what an introduction. So hey, I hope you've enjoyed talking with me. I've enjoyed talking. Until next time, aloha.